Good afternoon, Brollies. Welcome to today's course series. My name is Marina Pretorius, and I'm an organizational psychologist who is currently consulting with Brol and working closely with the Human Capital team. It is my privilege again today to welcome you and welcome our speaker. As social creatures, we have the need for relationships built deep into our DNA. Relationships, or as the well-known author Brené Brown says, we are wired for connection. Relationships and the quality of those relationships are therefore essential for our well-being. This is the reason why we will be devoting 2 sessions of the course series to this important topic. We all have a story to tell. Today we will hear about the power of storytelling, questions, and listening in bringing dignity to our relationships. We will look at ideas and practices that help our stories to shift, as well as how to listen and ask questions in a new way. Our speaker for today is Dr. Shanae Swart. She's a narrative therapist who has been translating these ideas and practices with organizations, communities, and individuals from various cultures and contexts. Her work builds on the gifts of narratives, human connectedness, diversity, and transformation, and it inspired her book called Reauthoring the World, the narrative lens and practices for organizations, communities, and individuals. For the last 20 years, she has been exploring how we can take back the pen and reauthor with dignity and beauty our human presence in the world. She believes that the way things are can be challenged and changed by the way we look, so that we can see and do differently in our relatedness with ourselves, one another, and the world, one story at a time. Welcome, Shanae, and thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing from you this afternoon. Over to you.
Hello, Marina, and to the Brol community, thank you so much to share these beliefs and ideas with you this afternoon, post-election, where so many stories are flying in the air. I want this afternoon to share the ideas and the beliefs and the lens and the practices in 2 parts. The first part of our coming together, we're going to look at a very well-kept secret, that we as human beings have the capacity to make meaning, and we have the capacity to make story. And that will be the first part. And it gives us a lens to look at relationships in a way that brings well-being, that brings health to our relationships. The second part, we're also going to look at what can we do when it comes to these relationships. What are practices that we can do that will invite dignity back into our relationships? But first, we're going to get into the best kept secret, I call it. And the first one I want to introduce you to is that we as human beings have the amazing capacity to make meaning. Now, I have no idea how many of you are on the call. Oh, there are 92, my goodness. I'm going to ask you a question, and it would be a great gift to me if you would answer in the chat. And please don't regulate your answers like, is this right or politically correct? The question is, when I say the word blue, what comes to mind immediately? Just type your responses in the chat and I'll keep my eye on it. Sky, communication, clear sky, blue skies, the ocean. Yes, what kind of ocean? Warmth, aura, a bad day. Fantastic. Happiness, peace, sea, peaceful. Amazing. I just gave you one word, and within that one word, we have a multitude of meaning. Oh yes, there's Monday too. I was waiting for Monday. And some people also talk about blues music, or some sport teams called Blue Bulls. So we have one word and we have a multitude of meaning. Oh, there's moon as well. So the first beautiful capacity that we have as human beings is that we talk to one another with words and we make meaning of those words. And that's, I think, where it goes, a lot goes wrong. You know, we think we know what somebody means. And is also a powerful way to look at relationships, because we can re-mean in a moment. We thought it was this way, and then somebody explains a word, and all of a sudden we say, oh, that's what you mean. And now we can understand better. So the first capacity is that we make meaning as human beings, and that is a way for us to notice in our relationships by asking questions. What do you mean when you say this word? We also live on a continent here in Africa where a lot of us talk to one another in our second and third language. And so we have to translate stories and memories and experience and values in our second language. And sometimes it takes a while for us to get the right word, or we don't even get it. And therefore, I think in countries where there are second language speakers, we need to take extra special care in asking, is this what you mean? In my understanding, this is what I mean. So for me, health and wellness, when it comes to relationships, first come to this capacity that we pause a little bit, that for the things that really matter, that we pause and ask, what do you mean? Or when you say that word, what is the meaning that you bring? So that's the first capacity, that we make meaning. The second capacity is that we are story makers. And now I know already when I say the word story, we go to, oh, that's children's stuff, or you're just telling a story, you know, those fisherman stories, the fish was this big between the eyes, they tell me. So it's not about these kinds of story. It is about the capacity to make story. So what we do as human beings is we connect the dots of moments in our lives, and then we weave them all together into a story. So that brings me to my second question in the chat, if you will be so gracious as to answer whatever comes to mind, and please don't judge it. So the question is, when first did blue become blue to you? You can just chat, whatever comes to you. When first did the word blue become full of meaning for you? You can type in the chat. That'll be a great gift. There we go. When I was taught about colors in my the school had a huge blue. Any other? Whoa, this was blue. This is really. May I tell you, I was always fortunate. I grew up in Port Elizabeth, and then I went to visit my friend in the Bahamas, and I remember it was an island called Long Island. And I've never seen so many shades of blue in my life, just in the water, all the colors of blue, and then even the reflection into the clouds were blue. So I would say my visit to Long Island, blue became blue for me. There are some other people saying during meditation, summer, when I looked up the sky and someone said, this is blue, the color of the house allocated to in school. Some people who have been saw the cartoons when you were small, I'm giving my age away, the Smurfs were really blue. So what happens, we not only make meaning of words, we also string those meanings together and we tell stories about blue. When first did it happen in my life? How does it influence my life? And that's the power of our story making capacity. And then it's a possibility for relationships, that we can make stories that moves us forward all the time, but it can also be a challenge when stories become so fixed that they become fact, when we say, oh, this is just the way things are, or it can never change, or I am stuck. This is my story and the story of my life. And so in that movement, meaning can shift, and our stories can shift within a second. I'm going to share a screen with you now to just explain this whole idea again. Let me just get... let's see it. Just going to close again. Ah, there it is. So what happens is that as human beings, we live in a multitude of stories. If you think of, I always think of stories as the sum total of all the moments of our lives. So if you think of the stories of your life, you have a multiplicity, I call it a Milky Way of moments that inform your life. And if you think of each of these crosses as experiences and moments in your life that you have made meaning of or not, then what we do is we almost like a string of pearls, put in the pearls of meaning, and then we tell a story. And then sometimes we tell and retell the same story that people, you know, your family and everybody is rolling their eyes. Oh, we've heard this story so many times that it becomes our lives. And we don't see, in those moments when stories become so stuck, we don't see those alternative moments anymore. There are moments, a multitude of them, that we haven't woven into the story, that might say exactly the opposite of what we say. So our lives are really hold all of these competing stories and experiences all together at once. And what is so powerful about these moments and stories is that they have three important influences: the stories we tell and the meaning that we make of our lives and our relationships impact how we think, who we are in the world. So for a long time, for instance, in the beginning of lockdown, I had this immense urge to start a vegetable garden. I've never grown anything. Every Mother's Day, I would give a gift of an orchard or something, and I would just die because I hope they never come and visit again, because this thing will not live through another year. But I had this urge, and I remember told my husband just before our big lockdown here in South Africa in the beginning of March last year, or end of March, I said to my husband, get me plants and seedlings and seeds and compost. And I just saw the confusion. I had to explain that various times, because in my weaving of the moments of my life, there wasn't a story of a gardener, not one that can keep things alive anyway. And so I started at the end of March, and great was my surprise when everything came up in abundance. And so that story shifted. Other moments, I started remembering that I've always wanted to do this. I started sharing all the spinach and the peas with my family, and they started planting. So not only did the story of who I see myself shifted, but the story of my relationship shifted, because all of a sudden I was a provider. I was the one bringing salad to family gatherings. And also my relationship to the world shifted, because all of a sudden I would look at recycling different. I would look at compost and waste differently. I would look at the possibility for a world where nobody's hungry differently. And so our stories are so powerful that it shapes and maintains who we think we are in the world, our relationships with one another, and also our relationship with the world. And like I said, there are always also competing stories. There's sometimes problem stories that we have, but there's always stories that tell about a different aspect of your life and your world. And the invitation is for us to allow the stories we want more of for one another in our relatedness to ourselves, to one another, and to the world to flourish and to support them deeply. So I already said we are meaning makers. And when you think of meaning makers, you can always think of this quote: a word creates a world. I said the word blue, and we had a multitudes of meaning in the room. And then also from those meanings and these moments and experiences, we draw them all together and we make stories. And those stories are super powerful as they shape and maintain who we are, how we relate to one another, and how we see the world. And the invitation of this work is, and this invitation to you also this afternoon, is how can we become authors, primary authors of the stories we tell, and co-authors of the relationships in which we stand with our partners, with our family, with our children, with our colleagues at work, with our friends, because we are always in relationship to stories. And what we'll do now is we'll also go to seeing what can we do. So we are human becomings. We are always on the way of becoming as our stories evolves. But we can do a couple of things that would sustain our story making capacity, that would hold the stories that we want more of for one another and for ourselves. So the first one is that we ask gorgeous transporting questions that would surprise us. I think we live in a world where so often we get questions that are like a McDonald's burger. You know, they taste the same everywhere. We know the answer. It's kind of ready-made questions. But how can we be really curious about one another's lives and be open to be transformed and surprised by what we hear? We'll also talk about gifts as a practice in our relationship and ways of listening that would bring back the dignity. I call it the re-dignifying practices, and that's what we will also have a look at right now. My apologies, I'm just moving the screen. Oops, that wasn't successful. There we go. All right, I'm just going to minimize the photograph so I can see all of the right. So if we think of what can we now do to hold meaning and to hold the beautiful forward, and the first thing I think of is respect. Now, the word respect comes from the Latin word respectus or respicere, and the word respicere is the word we use for spectacles, to look. And the word means back or again. So the invitation of respect is to look at one another again, to see one another again, afresh, anew. And that's also where the next word comes in, redignifying. Redignifying practices comes in a world where so often meaning is made about one another beforehand, where stories are put on people, labels are put on people, people being othered in various ways. So the redignifying practices is how can we hold this amazing capacity to make meaning and make story for ourselves and for our relationships and for the world in ways, in respectful ways, where they can flourish and live and invite new stories also. So firstly, we have two dilemmas as human beings. We are neurobiologically wired to judge. We look at a stranger or the other and we say, oh, I know about you. Danger, run away, be afraid, don't interact, don't look. That's the first thing that happens. And then secondly, we also are socially trained about the other and othering and being afraid of strangers. So that's the first thing, is that these practices are invitation for a movement from what we already do. We can't help it. We judge and we conclude about one another, also in our relationships, and especially in our long-lasting relationship, we think we know about one another. So it's the movement from what is familiar to us to an alternative that would open up meaning and that would open up new stories with one another. And so the first practice, the first movement almost, is an invitation to be carefully curious, to not think that we know about one another, but to, and the careful curiosity means that we're not like, you know, a soap opera story where we ask one another, and what happened then? It is a curiosity that holds the dignity of another person, that sees them as primary authors, the ones that are writing their lives. Now, if we go on our normal route from judging, we go to assumptions. We think that we know about you, and we start assuming, and we fill in a whole picture of who you are about. And so the invitation is, can we move from assumptions to asking questions that we really don't know the answer to? You know, those questions we know the answer to, they sound like, don't you think it would have been a great idea if you only was like me, is the subtitle of those kind of questions, if you only did this or that. So those questions we already know the answers to. And I think with intimate relationship and partnerships and people we've known a long time, to hold that curiosity open enough to really ask questions that we don't know the answer to. Very important. And that opens up for new meaning to exist and to come into the room. And secondly, can we use the vocabulary of the person you are talking to? So somebody you are in conversation with might say, for instance, this was a terrible day. Yeah, this was a terrible day. Let's go with that. And then we stay with their language and we're saying, tell us what was terrible in this day for you. And what's terrible even mean for you? So we can so often listen to one another saying, oh, you're having one of those days. And then we don't listen, we don't pause, we don't ask more to really understand. And that's also, these practices are also ways for us to understand and to listen better and to ask questions that people don't have ready-made answers to. In our normal movement, We judge, and then we assume and think that we know about you. Oh boy, and then we start fixing you. All our capes come on, and we are to the rescue, you know. I will come and fix you. I will rescue. I will help you. So instead of seeing somebody as needing fixing or helping, or we don't see human beings as broken, as somebody that needs our fixing and saving. We see people as gorgeous human beings that have a wealth of insight and knowledges and experiences that they can draw from if we only listen in ways that bring the dignity back and ask questions that invite people to answer for themselves, to bring those knowledges forward. And then we have this saying that, you know, be open to learn from one another. And that is a great way to start. But I want to take the challenge even further and saying, well, what if you are willing to listen to another person in a way that you are willing to change your mind about something? That doesn't mean that you're constantly changing your mind about things and that you don't have values that you stand on. But can we be open enough when we listen to one another to change our mind, to be transformed, to be surprised by what emerges from the conversation? Then usually from fixing and helping, boy, are we ready for our advice piece. Then we're going to tell and recommend how your life should be and what you should do, 7 steps that helped me. And we cannot not do that. We can't help ourselves. And the invitation is, if that advice blurs out of your mind, out of your mouth, pause a little bit. Give your advice, it's already out, you can't get it back. And then say to the person, that was useful and helpful to me, but I am not sure if that is useful and helpful to you. In that moment, you step back from your piece of advice in a way that a person can say, that was not helpful, or that made me feel worse. So that's a way that you can redeem yourself. I think when you've given the advice, the best place is to step back from the advice and then to give the authorship back to the person and saying, well, I'm not sure if this is useful and helpful to you. Then we also go into feedback and affirmations and compliments. And I want to say a little bit about that, because in Western society, I don't know even why we give compliments to one another, because we defend against them. You know, somebody would say, oh, this is such a nice pair of shoes or dress. And then you would say, oh no, I bought it at that place. You can also buy it there. Or somebody would do something beautiful and you would say, oh no, it's really my mother that taught me this. Or you found me on a good day. I'm not normally like this. We keep on defending ourselves against these compliments. So I don't know why we do it. I love watching compliments going back and forth and people saying, no, it's not true about me. So what I want to offer instead is what I call gifts. And this is an idea that I got from Peter Block. He wrote a book, Community, The Structure of Belonging. And Tom Carlson is a narrative therapist that I've been in conversation with. And he called it The Offerings of Our Moved Heart. And so this is quite a different way to be with one another. So if you have shared a conversation with somebody, you've had the honor of listening to them, asking them gorgeous questions, then at the end, so I'm going to use Sade as an example. I could say, Sade, you are super organized. My goodness, the emails that I received was amazing. They, were so exact. I can go on complimenting, and Sade can most probably say, no, this is my work. This is what I do. And so what a gift would be is when I say, Sade, receiving those emails was such a gift to me. Because firstly, I felt valued as a person. I felt included into this talk that I'm going to step in. I knew exactly what is expected of me. And most of all, the gift for me was that the excitement grew in me. Sometimes when I say yes for a talk, I'm like, oh, I don't know. But Sade, because of the way that you invited me in with your beautiful gift of organizing and detail and clarity, I felt included into this series and ready to share these ideas with you this afternoon. So that's the difference between compliments or affirmations, which are still positive judgments, hey, and a gift where I listen to you in a way that I notice when I moved in my body, when I moved in my heart, when I moved in my thoughts or my imagination, even when I'm challenged. Those are all gifts to me. So those are practices that we can use in our relationships with one another in ways that would open up meaning making, broaden up meaning making, and invite our stories to come and stand more fully on the stage of our lives. I want to also share this image with you. Sometimes when I talk to people, and I remember right in the beginning when I spoke to leaders, I would say, tell me a story of your leadership. And they would totally freak out and say, I don't have a story of leadership. And then the question morphed to take me to a moment when you showed up as a leader in a way that moves you forward. And so for those that are stories in relationships that you stand, when somebody says, sure, my freedom is really important to me, then this is a cheat question for you. You can say, take me to a moment when you experience this kind of freedom that you're talking about, that would help me understand what that looks like. And so that could be a cheat question if you want to explore the stories, maybe in your team or maybe in your family. I'm telling you, you would be surprised and hear stories that you have never heard before. So these moments for me are the keys. They are the keys or the portals to open up the stories of our lives in ways that draw other people in and that help them to understand you better. And for me, this is what wellness is about. This is what health in relationships are about, is that we can move with our stories, with our meaning making in ways that are preferred and in ways that move us forward. There we go. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to share these ideas. Marina, my 30 minutes are up, so it's over to you.
Shanae, you have given me so much language this afternoon. Thank you for that gift. I heard you using words that really created a picture for me. Words like gorgeous people, and the word gift itself, and a moved heart. I'm realizing that the words we use and just using different words than what we usually use can have such an impact on how we relate with one another, and how words can create a sense of being together, even in a context like this where we are far apart. Colleagues, I would really appreciate if you would want to direct some questions at Shanae and to myself, anything you would like to ask her. We are going to continue the session until all questions are answered. But Shanae, I loved your idea of cheat questions and cheat phrases on how to open up the conversation more. Are there a few more that you can share with us?
So I think the other thing, cheat-wise, is that we have lost in the Western world, in indigenous cultures, story and our story-making capacity is still well and alive. I remember watching a YouTube video about the people in the Kalahari, and this person said, 3 times a day around a fire, 25 people witnessing your story was kind of the daily allowance. And so now we live in these other dimensions, and we almost lost the art of telling the story. And we don't have time always. We have an interesting, let's say, we have an interesting relationship with time. So I think cheat-wise, you can say, take me to a moment, but then you usually have to help people tell the story. Like, who was there? What happened? What are you smelling, seeing, hearing, feeling in that moment? Is there any nature in that moment, or art, or beauty? So those are all ways that we can help a person, because I can tell you about a moment and then it's all heady. That was a great moment on Long Island, but I'm not there and you're not there. And so the idea of this kind of storytelling is to bring other people into the experience, to almost re-experience those moments we want more of, and then see what we can learn from them. So those are other cheat questions. Another cheat question that's super important for me is, who would not be surprised that you are taking us to this moment? We are related human beings, so we live in gorgeous relationships with one another, with our ancestors, with the spiritual, the mystery, nature, activities, adventures, and then also spaces. People have relationships to mountains and oceans, and special places in your house, maybe. So who would not be surprised is a very open question. We're almost asking, who in your relationships won't be surprised that this matters to you so dearly? I remember there was a woman, professor in algebra, that once said, my pillow won't be surprised that I am in this meeting where we want to move from a college to university, because my pillow has seen the tears that I have cried for my country to have their own university. So the children all went off to the UK, Canada, to go and study, and there was no university where they could also bring their skills back. People would then leave and then stay away. So we are, cats and dogs and mountains can all not be surprised why moments and experiences matter in our lives. So I think, I don't know if that's a response to your curiosity about cheat questions.
So much. I heard you talk about, our usual responses on how we would give advice and etc. And also these dignifying practices to ask better questions and to engage better. Do you have any tips that you can share with us on being on the other side? Because I think you're so right in saying that we have unlearned how to share stories, and one can maybe often find yourself in a situation where you are reluctant to share your story because of the judgment and because of the response that you may have received before around your story. What advice or tips can you share for us to be more open to share our stories and to respond to this richer questions that we may be getting from the people that we interact with?
Yeah, that is a real dilemma that we have in this world, because we've lost the art of storytelling. We don't always have the spaces that would hold our stories, and sometimes we have to be afraid to tell our story because it might be a career limiting move. And so then we might just tell a part of the story that we feel safe with and that we feel that we won't judge. So for me, the best is always to create the conditions to say, here are, in my case, when I work, the redignifying practices are there. They're out in the open, and this is the ground from where we can share our stories, where there will be no judgments. And I also find that when we have, when we listen in a way that we want to share a gift with somebody, we also listen differently. It is not to judge you or to help you or to give you advice. I'm listening to you in a way that I am willing to be touched and moved by what you say. So for the person on the other side, if I know that that is how you listen to me, not to correct me or do a goal setting for me or a developmental plan, then I find that people are more willing to share stories as is. But the dilemma is we do that self-regulation, self-judgment. So I'm thinking that you're thinking that this story sucks and it's never be good enough. So I think creating the conditions for stories to come in all their wildness and wonderfulness is super important. Otherwise, we would get thin stories that have no richness to it. Stories that sound like one or other story that we've heard from somebody else. But I know, does that help?
Definitely. Thank you very much. I want to add to that maybe, and that's the word courage that came to mind for me, as you were talking. I think we also need to muster up courage to start telling stories. And I think in this context, what we mean with stories is just to share more of what you mean with using a certain word, or what the context is within which you are saying what you are saying, and to be willing and open to create that context for the other person that is standing across from you, and maybe go as far as even to ask ourselves those questions of what do I mean when I use this word? And where am I coming from when I say something in a certain way? And then offer that to the person sitting on the other side. And in that way, almost engage with the conversation without waiting for someone to ask these rich questions, and be attentive and be respectful, and practicing the redignifying questions that you asked.
And can I also say, it's almost an attitude to the world. Also, is an attitude that I don't know your story. I might think, because my brain would go there, that I think if I look at you, that's going to be your story. But I have been surprised so many times that I've given up. So if we know in the beginning that we might be surprised, then our questions can be transporting in that sense, because I don't come from a place where I think I know. It's almost like the stories I hear or the books I read. They're always exciting, never boring.
Linda is asking us, do you find certain countries and cultures worse or better with telling and listening? And what about all the new generations, which are so IT driven? Everyone's staring at their phones.
Firstly, yes, definitely different cultures have different relationships. I do believe that all cultures have had storytelling legacies. I do believe that it's been part of our DNA somehow. And worse and better is almost when we set up conversations, how can we invite that capacity that I believe is already there, might just be hidden a little bit, to come into the conversation. And so maybe that's my expectations, but I've worked in various different cultures. And I'm always curious, especially the host, they would come and say, these people, they don't really talk. And so again, it's up to us to create those conditions, to invite this beautiful stories to come and have a say. So that, yes, there are differences, but I maybe that's the lens through which I look, that all people have a story to tell. And how can I invite that story? And the new generation, I often work with the 20-somethings in Denmark in a social innovation school. And I find them very engaged with one another, and not looking at their phones. So I think it's our invitation to how do we set up conversations where we are so engaged in being there, present with one another, and bringing dignity in the way we listen and the way we're asking questions, that we completely forget about the phone. And so I've seen that happening with young people. So I think it's about our invitation. And then must I read the other question? Is there a risk of oversharing in a work environment or a context? There are work environments and contexts that are also abusive. They're where things will be held against you. And so I think when we create cultures in organization, it is super important to say, these are the values, these are the stories that would help us understand you better and bring your gorgeous gifts to our workplace. And I think from an organizational understanding, it's very important. How do we as organization create spaces for my full humanity to come and show up and to bring all my gifts? Or perhaps asking and making people feel like you are prying. I think when the pen is in the hands of somebody, they always have the right to say, I'm not going to answer that question. When it feels like prying or for whatever reason. And then it's our work to profusely say, we're sorry. And to say, can I try again? I'm really curious about this, but I don't know how to ask it without you feeling that I'm prying. So people have been abused by questions, hey? Interrogations when we're small. Where were you? Why are you late? So we don't always have a wonderful relationship to questions. So how can we also craft questions that transport us into other worlds? And in that way, we should see the world and our experience together as a test field where we can say, I really want to ask a question in a respectful way. What would that look like or sound like?
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is that we always have an opportunity to respond again in a dignified way, to help the person on the other side understand where we're coming from with our questions. And to say it's out of interest and curiosity and interest in you as a person. And that is in itself dignifying by just offering where you are coming from and making the person hopefully feel safer in the context that you are asking the question.
Absolutely.
The other question I have is one, I think the word story for me, and it's also related to our relationship to time, is that stories takes a lot of time. So if we now are going to enter into this world of storytelling, then our relationship time might be impacted. Is there a way to also tell short stories, but meaningful stories? And do you have any tips around that?
So I think the quality of our questions determines what kind of stories we get. Hey, I work in processes where we have 10 minutes per person. That's it. And I'm always being told, whoa, time flies. So I think it's the nature of our questions that invite people to make meaning that they haven't made before and respect time. I think when we create the conditions where we can listen to one another and tell stories and make meaning in ways that we haven't done before, time flies. Or time stands still. I think we enter into a different relationship with time. I believe that if we make the time for meaningful stories, doesn't have to be a day, for meaningful stories, we redeem time. Because the relationships that are built in those moments are priceless. I remember I worked with a group of leaders of an insurance company in South Africa, and 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, giving gifts, 40 minutes. Let's say a 40-minute intervention. And he stood up in his reflection afterwards and he said, after hearing each one of their stories, I can now say, I will follow you. I will follow you if you become my leader, because I now understand what is meaningful to you, what you draw your life from, and why things matter to you. Now that, priceless. How many years can you put in that for time? Yeah. I don't know if that's a response.
Sinead, thank you so much for introducing us to this world of narrative and to the power of story. Thank you for offering us new ways to ask questions and to listen differently. And yeah, thank you just for sharing it with us this afternoon. Broadly, we introduced this as a first session. Next time we are going to also talk about how to do this in practice more in our teams. So the purpose of today's session was to make us aware of the impact of our stories in relationships and to try and offer a few more skills to open up the conversations between us. And next time, when we have Sinead back at the next core series session, we're going to go further into these skills and practices and how to practice it with one another so that we can build into our team relationships. Because the world of work and the relationships that we have there is such an important part of our well-being that we want to continue with this narrative and this story on how to build this very important well-being component in our lives. We look forward to seeing you again, Sinead, and Brolis, we look forward to having you at the next session. Remember, we are in this together, although we are apart, and we'll see you again next time.